This is Westmount, a very central neighborhood of Montreal, right beside downtown. Aside from the mansions at the top of the hill, Westmount is a pretty urban place, with apartment buildings, row houses, office towers, and 2 nearby metro stations. Despite this, Westmount technically isn't a part of Montreal. It's its own independent city, and none of the people or land inside it count for any statistics of the city of Montreal.
This is Fars, a small town about 20 kilometers from the edge of Ottawa suburbs and another 10 kilometers from downtown Ottawa. Fars is a pretty rural place, with 2 main roads going through town. Most people live in detached houses, and the town is surrounded by forests, fields, and farmland. Despite this, Fars is actually part of Ottawa, and all of the people and land here count for the city of Ottawa in statistics.
By any objective standard, Westmount is more a part of Montreal than Vars is a part of Ottawa, but that's not reflected in the city boundaries, which are driven as much by local political considerations as any reality of urban geography. For some reason, American cities illustrate arbitrary boundaries best, like this patchwork of city territories in Eugene, Oregon, that's confusing enough to have a guide for residents. Canadian cities don't tend to be quite this weird, but they don't by any means follow consistent principles either.
Inconsistent borders are a big problem for comparing cities. The city of Montreal has a population density 14 times higher than the city of Ottawa, but that's not a meaningful comparison because what each city includes is so different. Ottawa's borders cover a bunch of countryside, while Montreal's borders are much more limited, covering most of the central neighborhoods, but not most of the suburbs, and definitely no large amount of countryside. Montreal is denser than Ottawa, but not 14 times denser.
City boundaries can skew any other statistic too, like housing costs, family size, language demographics, walkability, and income. Independent cities in and around Montreal tend to have higher household incomes, so the fact that places like Westmount aren't a part of Montreal makes Montreal's average income seem extra low compared to Ottawa, whose wealthier areas are part of the city and account for its average.
These boundary problems do actually confuse people in real life. We recently heard someone say that Vancouver isn't a major city in Canada because it has less population than Winnipeg, which is technically true but not a meaningful comparison. Vancouver has way more people in its urban area. It just didn't expand its borders to include most of them like Winnipeg did, but the neighboring cities function like an extension of Vancouver for most practical purposes.
To meaningfully compare cities, whether on density, population, or income, we need a consistent standard for what to count as being part of the city. The most well-known option is to use Census metropolitan areas, which adds surrounding municipalities, including suburban and rural ones, to a city based largely on commuting patterns.
Under these borders, Montreal includes Westmount, obviously, as well as a gigantic area that goes almost as far west as Ontario. Ottawa's Census metropolitan area doesn't add that much land in Ontario because it was already big there, but it does merge with Gatineau to include land on the Quebec side too. It's possible to find statistics for each individual side of the Ottawa-Gatineau CMA, but we're fine with them grouped together.
These borders help a lot for making cities more comparable. Using CMA boundaries, Montreal is now only 5 times denser than Ottawa instead of 14 times denser, which is closer to accurate, and Vancouver is now correctly recognized as having way more people than Winnipeg.
There are some problems with this solution though, because Census metropolitan areas are still shaped by arbitrary city boundaries. They can only add complete neighboring municipalities, and they can never be smaller than their original municipal borders. This means that cities still aren't quite as comparable as they could be. So for example, the Ottawa CMA is still extra big and rural compared to most other CMAs.
For a lot of purposes, this doesn't matter too much. Population or house prices aren't going to be massively changed by Ottawa's metro area, including more countryside and a few more small towns than Montreal's metro area. But for anything to do with land, including the shape of the city, the overall size of the city, or the population density of the city, Census metropolitan areas still don't provide a great picture.
A better option for understanding the physical footprint of a city is the population center boundaries from Statistics Canada, which they used to call a city's urban area. These borders ignore political boundaries and define cities according to their contiguous developed area, meaning any connected urban or suburban development, excluding countryside as well as other towns or cities separated from the city by countryside.
Population centers don't always have pretty shapes, but they do arguably give the most accurate picture of what each city actually looks like on the ground. Population centers usually cover around 90% of the metropolitan area's population, but only 5 to 30% of its land. Like with the metropolitan area, Ottawa and Gatineau share a population center.
Under population center boundaries, Montreal's density is about 50% higher than Ottawa's, which is a much more accurate comparison of the actual developed land in each city than previous numbers that Montreal is 5 or even 14 times denser.
Technically speaking, these population center boundaries should still give more accurate city comparisons for most other measures too, from house prices to total population. But census metropolitan areas at least work pretty well for those things, which is good because it's more common to find city data broken down by metropolitan area than by population center. But for anything related to land, including population density, these population center or urban area boundaries really are the best way to go.
We've focused here mostly on Ottawa and Montreal having very different city borders. But to give an overview across the country, Halifax is like Ottawa in having borders that are so spacious that they're mostly countryside. Calgary, Edmonton, and Winnipeg have borders that cover most of their suburbs and don't go much further, while Toronto, Montreal, and especially Vancouver don't even try to include most of their suburbs.
We discussed some of the worst cases for city comparisons, but sometimes cities have approximately similar borders, like Calgary and Edmonton, and in those cases, using municipal borders for city comparisons can be meaningful. It's also possible to combine some municipalities on an ad hoc basis to make some broadly similar entities. If you want to compare Montreal with the city of Toronto, rather than using the city of Montreal, grouping together the municipalities in the island of Montreal is a better fit.
One final point, some people might object to both census metropolitan areas and population center boundaries because they think that suburbs shouldn't be grouped together with central cities. That's fine, there really are lots of differences between Montreal and its suburbs. The same can be said for central Ottawa versus its suburbs though, but the problem is that Ottawa comes with its suburbs attached to it. If you want to make a meaningful comparison, either you need to include Montreal's suburbs or you need to exclude Ottawa's suburbs. You really just need to make sure you're comparing apples to apples.
Thanks for watching through to the end of the video. This is really an extension of a previous video we did on walk score comparisons between cities, except that here we covered actual solutions and also made it clear that the problem affects lots of other measures, not just walkability. Hopefully this video provides some context for when we look at city data based on metropolitan areas or population centers in the future.